philosophy in life. Whatever I believe, I should make happen. It's that simple. And if a customer is making a mistake, the customer isn't always right, trust me. And if you want to do great products, don't listen to your customers, by the way. Lots of bad lessons in business school. I used to give a talk in the 80s on why not to listen to your customers. And maybe somebody will ask me a question. The point is, if you actually believe something, you try your best to make it happen. It doesn't always happen, but it happens most of the time. I like to say failure does not matter. It's success that matters. And nobody remembers what you failed at. So everybody remembers Sun. Does anybody know a company I started before Sun? But my point is, people don't remember your failures. And I like to say my willingness to fail is what gives me the ability to succeed. I find most people are so afraid of failing, they don't try and do the things that would be important enough to do. Anything worth doing is hard. You can make money and good status and all that in regular big companies. There's very little really interesting stuff you can do in big companies. It comes shockingly, it's shocking to people, but who reinvented retail? It wasn't Walmart, it was Amazon. Who reinvented media? It wasn't NBC, it was YouTube. Who reinvented space? It wasn't Lockheed, it was SpaceX. I was hard-pressed to think of one thing that had come out of a large company in the last 20, 30 years that was materially changing the landscape. And the reason's very simple, and this is all interesting things happen at the edges of the system. They don't happen in the solid core. And all that you have to do where things are fuzzy, unclear, uncertain. If there's a market forecast, it's not at the edge of the system. If some analyst has a report, it's not worth going into that area. Right? In the edges where things are uncertain is where all the evolution is, and where interesting changes in business or society happen. And unless you're there, and learning fast from being there and not being too arrogant to believe you know what's going to happen, you're not going to be in that learning edge of the wave where new things are happening. And as career advice, I say, and that's where failure happens often. You want failure to be small and success to be very large, which is the characteristic of option value. You lose your option price, but you get option value if it's successful. That all happens at the edge. And most people in their life, in their business, reduce risk to the point where the probability of success goes higher, but the consequences of success are inconsequential, as opposed to reducing the probability of success and increasing the consequences of success, which is sort of my life philosophy. Trust me, it's a lot more fun than spending 30 years at Goldman. So Professor Tetlock, when he was at Berkeley, did research on expert opinion. All the analysts you read, all the McKinsey reports, and by the way, Bain and BCG, no different. And he followed all their forecasts. For 20 years, 28,000 individual forecasts from 250 experts, where when the forecast was made, he classified what would be a success, what would be a failure, and the book is called Expert Political Judgment. So all these great studies, the 10-year studies McKinsey did for millions of dollars for AT&T on what would happen to the cell phone business, that's a fun story. across 28,000 individual forecasts and 84,000 possible scenarios, the average accuracy of the best experts, whether it was Henry Kissinger, Tom Friedman, McKinsey, your favorite economic forecaster, the average accuracy was about the same, to use his words, as dart-throwing monkeys. So if you want to run your life on these forecasts and create the illusion of knowing, great, go do it. You'll follow a path that others will reinforce because you can give them a data quest study or a Bain forecast. Or you can discover the edges where things are happening and changing, know that you don't know, and really change the world. Now, I once looked at all social changes, not just business. And I looked at a decade, and I said, for people born between 1940 and 1950 or 1950, of all the people born on this planet, if you take the 100 major areas and defined, could you find 100 people in each of those areas from that decade, that generation, who affected change? It didn't matter whether it was music, arts, research in social sciences, technology invention, business. You can't find 100 areas, and you cannot find 100 people that stand out in each of these areas in any given decade. So less than 10,000 people born this decade will influence all of what society does, think, happen. I'd like to say you should try and be one of those people, and none of those people will follow any analyst forecast. They will have an internal compass, they'll have self-confidence in a belief system, and they'll make change happen. I'm very passionate about this, because frankly, it only takes a few people to change the direction of any industry or social trend. In the last 15 years, there's only once in my life I've called somebody and say, I'd like to speak at this conference. And that wasn't a popular conference. It was a small thing in a hotel room in San Francisco, and it was called FailureCon, where everybody who had failed came. And I wanted to speak to this issue of failure. There are so many stupid things. You know, the iPad is so popular. We tried to do it. Probably one of my large mistakes in the late 80s. And I can go into details, and I'll cut it short. What I would say is I'm never embarrassed about my failures. And so if you search on the web for my failures, you'll find lots of them, and you'll find me talking about them. And it's important, because given my philosophy, where I screw up doesn't matter, because it's a long list. In fact, it's a longer list than my successes. But like I started with, nobody remembers the data dump here. Everybody remembers sun, right? So failure, try and fail, but don't fail to try. Nassim Taleb, in his book Anti-Fragile, which I recommend everybody read if they're setting off on a career as a personal philosophy. Mine happens to coincide, and I'm not talking about Black Swan, but his book called Anti-Fragile. You know, when I graduated, I went into entrepreneurship. Nobody went into entrepreneurship out of the business school, and people said, why wouldn't you work for Goldman or McKinsey? And I said, why would you? Like, I couldn't fathom why you would want to do that job, right? I still can't, by the way. For those of you going to those places, and I'm sure there's plenty, I'm probably not the right person to talk to you. I frankly don't even care to talk to you. All of you others. I think there's something wrong with anybody who fundamentally wants to go work for one of the consultants or the investment banks today in this part. They don't understand how the world is going to work in the future.